Cloud. All right, perfect. Well, welcome everybody. It is Thursday, October 13th, 2022. And I am really excited to welcome you to the 5th Safe Sport workshop that we've been running. These are meant for anybody in the sports industry, provincial organizations, local organizations, even national, multi-sport, whatever, whoever. If you're involved in sport, you're welcome at these. We do record them and put them in our learning center, and I'm just going to repost that link in the chat for anyone who doesn't know about that. There's all kinds of sport resources in there, everything from social media management to governance to safe sport, lots of stuff in there. So have a look around. I would like to acknowledge that our offices and my house are on the unceded and traditional lands of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations. I know that's the sort of the official quote, but yeah, I feel it quite personally, and it means a lot to me. And I'm still trying to figure out how to process what that means and how we go forward from here. I think there's still so much work for us to do around truth and reconciliation, and that's a big part of our strategy at viaSport. I would like to introduce you to the wonderful Nadia Kyba, who is our safeguarding liaison with viaSport. And we try and run these workshops to address needs that we see and hear from the people that we work with. And we have this mediation service that we've been running that's available to our accredited sports organizations, so provincial, multi-sport, and disability sports organizations, where if there's an issue that mediation might help with, we're able to provide Nadia to see if she can help. And we're getting amazing feedback on that. And what we're realizing is that Nadia can't be everywhere all the time. And so the idea with this webinar here is for her to try and give us some skills so we can do this too. And then when there's stuff that we can't figure out and we're still stuck on, then we can bring her in. So Nadia, over to you.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks for that introduction. I think that's exactly the purpose behind this. And hello, everyone. I am calling in from the unceded Coast Salish territory, and I wish to acknowledge and express my gratitude to the Musqueam, Kwantlen, and Tsawwassen nations. I'm here in the south part of Richmond in Steveston at my home office. And if we haven't met before, because I think I've met a good number of you, as Andrea said, my name is Nadia Kyba, and I'm viaSport's safeguarding liaison. And my role is to support leaders of provincially funded sports organizations by helping them with either facilitated meetings or conflict management training. And where that fits in terms of viaSport and their implementation of the BC Universal Code of Conduct is the idea that the more people within the sport community are able to manage conflict on their own, are able to have those really tricky conversations, the more when boundary transgressions come up or child maltreatment or participant maltreatment comes up, people are going to be able to address it sooner because they're going to have the confidence in their communication skills and in having those difficult conversations. So I've been really enjoying my work, working with tons of different sports and just sort of seeing some of the similarities and just the real openness to learning. And it's been just a pleasure for me. As Andrea mentioned, the purpose of the meeting today is to provide a high-level overview of the mediation process with a highlight on some of the skills used in mediation that can then be used by yourselves. So my guess is that if any of you have siblings or are the parents of siblings, you've all probably done some mediation in your lives already informally without knowing it. And so what I'm going to do today is sort of just put some terms to it and talk about some best practices. So by the end of the day, I'm hoping that you are more familiar with what mediation is and how you can apply it in your own professional lives as well as home lives, hopefully. So here's our agenda. We're going to first of all define mediation, talk about what it is. We're going to compare mediation to other dispute mechanisms. I think oftentimes people get a little bit confused about what they all mean and what they all are. We're going to talk about the core of what mediation is, and that's moving from positions to interests. So you'll know more about that by the end of the workshop. We're going to spend time talking about how to frame an issue or a problem in a neutral way that's not going to put people's backs up so that they're going to be really ready to collaborate and work through their problems. We'll talk about meeting guidelines, and we'll talk about the structure of the meeting itself. And then I want to spend the second half of the workshop doing a small group activity where I I'm hoping that you can all work through a scenario and apply some of the mediation tools to it so that you have a little bit of practice doing that. And then we'll come back and have a question and answer session. Sometimes I feel like it's in the doing that we learn more so than in the listening and looking at PowerPoints. So hopefully everyone will be able to stay for that. Okay, so we're going to start here with the question, what is mediation? Mediation is really, it's a conflict management tool that's used to assist individuals who are engaged in a dispute. So if there's some sort of a problem, to move forward in a collaborative way. So what we know about conflict is that as much as we sometimes want it to, it doesn't go away on its own. So if we have a disagreement, and we kind of ignore it, turn a blind eye, time passes, oh, maybe next season it'll be better. Maybe next season this family will leave, this coach will leave, this administrator will leave, and it'll all go away. That doesn't usually happen. And then what happens is that it becomes compounded and it becomes much more complex and really hard to sift through. So mediation is one way to assist when you see conflict at ground zero. I mean, it can also happen later on. I certainly have a lot of referrals of problems that have been going on for many years, but the more you can get in right at that beginning, the better. Mediation is you don't need a law degree to do. I mean, if you're doing mediation in court, certainly you would need a law degree, but my belief is that mediation is a modality that can be used by anybody. And it's really just a way to come together and speak together about a problem and figure out a solution in a collaborative way.
Nadia, we often get stuck at this point, don't we, when we're first talking to a group of people. We've heard things like, oh, I don't want to sit down and hold hands and sing Kumbaya with these people. And it's like, that's actually not what mediation is. So this slide, I think, it seems obvious that you'd put it there, but it's actually really important for people to understand what it is and what it isn't. So I'm glad you included this.
I think, Andrea, that was probably a quote we had from somebody who we were suggesting mediation to a while back. So it's, sometimes people do think that. And I'm going to sort of talk about why that is a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, so mediators and facilitators are good listeners. So that's always the starting point. You have to be able to listen to all the parties that are involved in the conflict. They're curious. They're interested in knowing what's going on. They ask open-ended questions so that they can gather as much information as possible. They really challenge positions. So people are coming in saying, this is the way it has to be. I'm right. I'm right. Don't you think I'm right? Mediators and facilitators and leaders challenge that. And through those open questions, they tend to think outside the box. One of the key roles is establishing and enforcing meeting guidelines. We'll talk more about that a little bit later, but that's part of having a process that's productive with really clear meeting guidelines. And when they're not being followed, addressing that as soon as possible. Sometimes in a mediation process, there's a need for breaks. Well, often there's a need for breaks. It can be called having a caucus or caucusing. So mediators and facilitators use those regularly. It gives people kind of a chance to breathe, and the breaks can have more than one. Usually if it's on Zoom or if it's in a workplace, you set up different rooms and it can have more than one person in the room just to kind of catch your breath, caucus, talk about what's going on, and then come back with a more clear head. Mediators and facilitators are neutral. They don't pick sides. They don't insert their own perspectives. They definitely don't make decisions about how the dispute will be resolved, as tempting as it sometimes is. It's the decision about how it's resolved is up to the parties who are involved. And they don't determine who is right and who is wrong. So after the mediation happens, generally, if there's an agreement that comes out of it, the mediator will draft the agreement and have everybody review it before it's then shared. So these, I was actually, when I was coming up with this list today, just thinking it's interesting to me because I think that these are all qualities of strong leaders. So it's not just, they're not just mediation and facilitation skills. These are all qualities that likely a lot of you already have as leaders in the sports world. So it's really tapping into those strong leadership skills when you're thinking about mediation. So this is what mediation sometimes gets confused with: arbitration. So arbitration is where two parties voluntarily give their dispute to an arbitrator who will then impose a binding decision. So they give evidence to the arbitrator. The arbitrator will sift through emails and all of the phone recordings, all of the evidence, and then make a decision based on what they think is the right answer. So you can see from this that it's actually very different than mediation. Mediation is collaborative. If everybody doesn't agree on the decision at the end, then that decision doesn't stand. Whereas arbitration, it would be one person saying, yeah, this is the decision. Have any, just out of curiosity, maybe throw it in the chat, have any of you been in a mediation? Or you could put your hands up too.
We've got a few yeses here. Several, yeah, okay.
And what about an arbitration?
Yes to both.
Hey.
Few yes to both is, yep.
Yeah. Okay, so likely if you've had a chance to participate in both of them, rather than either or, you've seen that difference. There's definitely a different tone. So the real key to mediation is figuring out how to create an all-win for the participants who are involved. I think that our society and certainly sports culture is really focused on this win-lose mentality. And it has to be, because in sports in particular, there's a winner and there's a loser, right? So it's tough when you're working in the sports world with people and you're trying to figure out, well, how can everybody win in this dispute? How can everybody have their needs met? People get competitive. They want to be right. And I think that that's true in sports as well as our broader society and in our culture, especially in North America. So with mediation, we are trying to create that all-win situation. And the way that we do that is by moving people from what's called positions to interests. And I'm just going to jump in to show you what that looks like. Those of you who have been in my in my workshops before have seen my icebergs. There's always an iceberg for everything I find. So what positions are a perceived fixed solution to a problem. It's where you're really stuck and you're like, the only way this is going to work is if this happens. And you're kind of closed off. My daughter wants to buy a car and she's 18. And I'm like, nope, you can't have a car. So like I'm being super positional about that, right? We all do that. We do that just quite naturally every day. And she's like, yes, I'm going to buy a car. I have to have a car. So we're staying up here. When her and I are debating about the car, we're staying up here at the very top. And we're just focused on our set answer to the problem without really even understanding what the problem actually is. So when we hear positional behavior, or positional language, you may, and this may sound familiar to some of you working in sport, people may say things like, well, I won't attend the meeting if this person is there, or if it's at this location, or if you do that, then I'll do this. It's where people kind of double down on their preferred outcome. Sometimes I'll hear really positional behavior when people are talking about policy. So they'll say, well, it's going to happen that way because that's what the policy says, without trying to really look at what was the spirit of the policy, because everything can't possibly be written into a piece of policy, right? And so rather than just being positional about the policy, it's about being creative and thinking about, well, how can the policy be used? And then the other example I have is comments that I hear a lot are people saying things like, well, it's got to be this way because that's the way we've always done it. And I think that any of you who are working on boards where there's a lot of transition, or even coaches who have newer coaches and then older coaches, the newer coaches are coming in with their new ideas, and older coaches who may be uncomfortable with that, or for whatever reason, may get kind of positional, right? Nope, it's always worked, so this is how we're going to keep doing it. So that's what positions are. And then when we go beneath the surface of the water and we look at our iceberg, we can see that, wow, there's a whole lot of ice under there, right? There's a whole lot more going on under the surface that we don't necessarily see. And that's what interests are. So interests are what's actually important to each person who's involved in the conflict. If you think about the positional behavior or the positions that people take, interests are actually based on that. So you can oftentimes guess what interests might be just hearing people's positions. So all of this stuff underneath the water is what is important to people. And that's where the conversation really needs to focus. So if you have a dispute that you're helping manage, or if you're involved in a dispute, really try and think about, well, what are my positions? What's my set answer to this problem? But what's important to me? And once you do that, you're going to find that you're going to get a lot more information. And then the next step after that is figuring out, well, what are some of the common interests between all of the parties who are involved? What are things that are important to everyone? And that's a real building block to developing an agreement or developing a plan for next steps. So just to give you a few examples of where where interest can come from. This is a framework that was developed by a type of mediation, which is called insight mediation. And they talk about there being threats that support positions. So oftentimes people take positions when they think that their sense of self is at stake. So they think that maybe they think that they're going to be embarrassed, or they're going, something is going to negatively impact their person. There's practical, when something we care about that really helps our life to function or want to achieve is at stake. So if you have an athlete who really wants to make it to the provincial team, the national team, and they're worried that something's at stake, they may double down on their position, or their parent may double down on their position about, say, who's coaching them, right? Or what team they're on. There's relational. So this is when our sense of how people should interact with each other in their roles is at stake. And if it doesn't match with what our belief is, we get positional. Administrators should be doing this, coaches should be doing this, there shouldn't be crossover here or there, athletes should be doing this, is where you get kind of stuck on relationships and roles. And then structural. So often we'll have a sense of how structures should be working and functioning. And if it's not working or functioning in that way, that can be a challenge for us, and that can sort of support our positions. So I'm going to give you a little example of all of this, just a very simple example. Okay, so we got our iceberg. And here's our, Andrea and I are on a road trip.
Andrea is always freezing. The seat heater is on.
Oh, so this is accurate. I made this without consulting with Andrea. Okay. I don't know if anyone else is in the car with us, but basically, like, we are arguing about this. So Andrea's position, her fixed solution to a problem, is that she wants those windows up, and I want the windows down. So that just seems very simple. And maybe people would be like, well, how about it for half the drive, we have the window up, and then half the drive, we have the window down? That's fine, but that's not necessarily addressing our interests or our needs. So let's take a look at what our needs might be, or our interests are. So I nailed that, Andrea. Staying warm, having awesome hair at the end of the trip, not windblown, and being comfortable on the drive. So that's what's important to you. Those are your interests. For me, I'm menopausal. I get hot flashes all the time, and I need to manage that. I need to stay cool. Andrea brought like a really stinky tuna sandwich, and it's grossing me out, the smell of it. So like, I want that window down until the air clears, and being comfortable on the drive. So we can see here that being comfortable on the drive is a common interest between the two of us. So super simple example, although I'm sure many of you have had to deal with this situation within your families, with the whole windows up, windows down. So now we're going to talk about framing the issue or the problem. So I think Einstein was actually, he was a physicist, but I think he was also a social worker, because he had such an incredible way of understanding human behavior. So he talked about spending the time that you need to figure out what the actual problem is. And it's incredible to me how long it actually takes to really understand what the problem is, and how often everybody who's involved has a different view of what the problem is. So that's one of the first steps in mediation, is to figure out what is the problem? What are we trying to sort out here? And when thinking about Einstein. So if we go back to the car, what do you guys, maybe throw it in the chat or just put up your hand, what do you think the problem is here?
Hair and odors, nice.
That's a good kick of the can, Pierre.
The fact that I'm actually a lizard, we need to ride in 2 different cars. Nice.
So Kurt, that's a position.
Different needs for ambient temperature, nice. different views of what's comfortable.
Yeah.
Temperature control. Failure to communicate. Yeah. Conflicting needs.
I'm going to give Alan the gold star. Finding a solution to being comfortable, right?
Yeah.
So it's very broad. It doesn't use any subjective language like saying, oh, the tuna, what, I can't remember who said that. And it doesn't give a solution, right? So we need to actually identify what's the problem. What is the problem? So that's the hard part, like Einstein said. And these are just some ideas and tools when you are out there trying to mediate disputes within your organization that you can use. So generally, when we're framing a problem, we're trying to use positive language. So say it in the positive. Use the 20. This is a cool tool. 40, 20, 10, 5. So when you start to describe the problem, maybe you have 40 words because it's a big, long problem, and then try and just keep reducing it so until you just have 5 to 10 words. Asking the stakeholders to frame the problem. So that's another, I love doing that. So when I do prep calls for mediation, I'll say, what do you think the problem is? And they'll tell me, and then I try to reframe it using some of these tools, right? And making sure that it's neutral, challenging assumptions that people are making, framing the problem as a question rather than a statement. So Alan's was finding a solution to being comfortable. And I think that this would be even better, in my opinion. Alan could say, how can we find a solution to both of us being comfortable, or something like that, but making it into a question, because then when everybody's working together, they're working towards an answer to a question. So it just makes it a little bit easier. And really important, avoiding all subjective language. So if out of all of these, you don't remember any one point, please try to remember the subjective language, and it slips in. But if subjective language is where you're not describing a specific action, it's where you're adding your own kind of input, and like it's things like the word respect. That's a very subjective word, or unreliable, subjective, right? So we want really concrete language. Here's some examples of reframing or framing the issue. So the first one is, and I think we hear this one a lot actually, our board is toxic. So framing that in a different way, we could say something like, how can we make our board function more effectively? Another one, decision-making is biased. How do we make decision-making more transparent and understood? Our head coach breached our code of conduct. What is our understanding of our code of conduct? So it's just looking at the problem and framing it in a way that's more neutral. And by doing that, you're really going to make people build trust that their opinion is going to be heard. Because if you frame it in a way that, say our board is toxic, maybe some people don't think it's toxic. And so if that's the problem that you're trying to answer, you're still in that right, wrong kind of mode. Whereas how can we make our board function more effectively is much more neutral, and it brings everybody on board to be able to collaborate about how do we do that. Likely everybody wants their board to function more effectively. And if you are mediating a dispute, this is something that you can ask the participants to work on. Okay, just a couple more slides before I send you guys off. One of the most important tools that a mediator uses, and please don't skip this tool, it's so important, establishing meeting guidelines. So at the very beginning, if you're bringing a couple of people together to talk about a problem, asking that question, what are our meeting guidelines? How are we going to be together? And I've heard people use other terms like what are rules of engagement? What are, can't think of others right now, but things like that. And when we do that, we're doing that first step of building trust so that people can be open and honest during the conversation. But where I see a lot of problems happen, and I've experienced this a lot myself, is when meeting guidelines aren't followed and the person who's facilitating the meeting doesn't deal with it. So if there's someone eye rolling or texting or just doing things that they shouldn't be doing because of the meeting guidelines, if it's ignored by the facilitator, that's basically giving them permission to do it and making it acceptable. When people do stuff like that, they're communicating. They're communicating that they think whatever is being said is, they don't agree with it, whatever it is that they're communicating. So as that's another big tip, is the second you see something, ask about it. Like, hey, Catherine, I just noticed you rolled your eyes and looked the other way. Is there something going on? Is there something that you'd like to share? Or, hey, Clayton, I noticed you looking down and texting. Should we call for a break in the meeting? Is it something urgent or is it something that can wait? Right at the beginning. Because if you give permission, then the other people, by not addressing it, the other people in the meeting don't feel safe. So some examples of these. The other thing with meeting guidelines is they should be developed as a group. Like I have my own meeting guidelines that I like to see, but I'm always really careful to make sure that the group also includes what's really important to them. So these are just some sample meeting guidelines that I like to use. I'm not going to read them out. I think most of you have probably seen meeting guidelines like this. Again, trying not to be too subjective, like using language that is pretty concrete. I always avoid the term respect. Like if people bring up the word respect, really try to flesh that out. Like, what does respect mean for you? What will that look like in the context of our meeting? Yeah. So those are some sample meeting guidelines.
Can I just talk a little bit about the confidentiality piece, Nadia?
Mm-hmm.
Just to be really clear about what you're expecting from that. So confidentiality to some people means I won't even discuss that this meeting happened. And to other people, it means I won't discuss the content of the meeting. So just make sure that people are clear on what their definition of that is.
Thanks, Andrea. Absolutely. And another piece is if some people aren't able to make the meeting, but you want to share information that was discussed at the meeting, you would need to get everybody's agreement to do that. And that quite happens quite often because it's hard to schedule everyone, but just being really transparent about that. Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Okay, so this is just basically what to expect in one of my meetings. People can do this in their own way. There are, specific things to follow in a mediation, but you should try and make it comfortable to you. Generally, prior to the meeting, you'd like to speak with all of the parties involved separately on their own and figure out what are their positions, what are their interests, and what do they see as the issue. And then you have the fun task of scheduling a meeting, which is always like, thank you, doodle polls or whatever we all use. And then at the meeting, group guidelines are established. The problem is neutrally framed as an issue. I generally send that out to the group ahead of time and get some feedback to make sure that everybody agrees on what the issue is before they get to the meeting, because I don't want to waste time in the meeting debating what the issue is. We explore the interests and highlight those common interests, and then really just having that space to be creative. So any and all ideas on how to work through the problem should be heard and should be written down so that everybody can see them. And like, it's kind of one of those, there's no stupid ideas situations, right? So you just really wanted to have a good creative brainstorming session. And then there's discussion, and then eventually a plan or an agreement is developed. So that's the basic outline of a mediation style meeting. So what I was hoping to do, because I know, oh gosh, always over, Andrea? It's 1:37. I was hoping to put you into breakout rooms with a scenario and have you just work through that in groups. So maybe, Andrea, do you think we could do that for like 12 minutes?
Yeah, for sure. How many people do you want in the groups?
Why don't we do groups of 4?
Okay.
And then please, unless if you can in your breakout rooms, turn on your cameras if you can, if you're comfortable. If you're not, don't worry about it. But I always think it's easier to work in small groups with your cameras on. I'm gonna put the scenario and these instructions in the chat.
Okay, so I've got the breakout group set up to auto close after 11 minutes because it'll give you the 60-second countdown. So that'll be 12 minutes total. We need to post the scenarios in the chat before people head into the breakout groups, because otherwise you won't be able to see them. I know we've had a few people who've had to pop off early, but that's okay. That's okay. Okay, that's all set up. I'm actually gonna, oh no, we'll get the scenario in, and then I'll stop the recording and we'll pick up at the end again. Okay, so the scenario is now in the chat. So yeah, and the instructions for the breakout room are there as well. Zoom skills are limited, don't worry about it. It may ask you if you want to join your assigned breakout room. Just click on the blue button. It'll probably say join or yes or something. And then it should automatically poof you back out of the breakout room when you're done, and you'll magically teleport back into the main room. Okay. Anyone have any questions before we hit go?
I take it we unmute.
Yes, you can unmute once you're in there, or
Okay.
now, whatever you want to do. Okay, well, I'll zap you all off into your rooms. Have fun, and we'll see you in 12 minutes. All right.
Welcome back, everyone. Show of hands, who was able to finish the entire activity?
Ooh.
Pierre, your group? Carol, were you in the same group as Pierre?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize. I know probably that could have taken longer. I mean, this topic really is, it's a very big topic, and it could take much longer, but my hope is that all of you will continue to learn about it. And I would encourage just practicing some of these skills and really listening. When you're listening to the radio, listen for positional language, especially with politicians. You'll hear it a lot. If this doesn't happen, then so it's kind of interesting once you know about it. I'm going to just show a last slide and then field questions. Sorry. Okay, so this quote I just love. Cassidy Caron, who led the Métis delegation to Rome, you may remember last year when she went to meet with the Pope, talked about how it was a first meeting and relationships are built over 100 cups of tea. And that's really, I think that principle holds true for any sort of problematic relationship. So if you have a mediation and your expectation that after 2 hours, everything's going to be hunky-dory and everyone's going to leave with the outcomes that they want. Probably that's not going to happen. But if you focus on the process, on the idea of people coming together and talking and trying to understand each other, then that's going to take you far. And you may have to have a follow-up meeting or a third follow-up meeting or a fourth follow-up meeting. And it's usually in those subsequent meetings that magic happens, because people can go away and really process what they've heard the other person say. So please don't get frustrated if, you know, at that first meeting, you don't get that outcome that you're really hoping for. Okay, so there's about 5 minutes. I can do a few questions, and then I can also do some offline questions. If people would like to shoot me an email, that's fine. Or even hop on a phone call. I'm open to that as well. Do you want to maybe put your hands up so it doesn't take so long to type things into the chat? Pierre.
In my experience, mediation is successful when both parties leave the room equally annoyed. And that's because there's a compromise, is the sense of hurry. Now, in business, this works because you have to get going. In sports, family, and other things, that does not work. So it's another form of mediation, hence the quote about the relationship is over 100 cups of tea. Mediation in that case should be seen as a first step. But in the business world, once it's mediated, we move on. We're too busy to linger on the past.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a big difference for sure. Thanks for that, Pierre. I love that, when both parties are equally irritated with one another. Who else had their hand up? I just saw.
Nadia, do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can
Oh,
see?
sorry. Yes.
There we are. Now we're back in the room.
Carol.
Hi, thanks for this. Really appreciate it. Pierre, Carol, and I were having some really good discussions, and Pierre brought up a point that I really took and wrote down here, talking about getting to the core of the issue. And if you look at that scenario, I've worked in sport for, gosh, almost 3 decades now. And a lot of times when you have situations like this, those that you're working with really don't want to discuss what the core issue is. So the question I would ask is that how are ways you can, or wording or language you can use, just so I can put a picture in my head of how you might try to frame the issue and hold discussion with someone that really at the end of the day doesn't want to get to the core problem. So for example, in this scenario, the late payments are because there's personal financial issues, but they don't want to discuss that openly. So, you know, is there methodologies you would recommend or language you would recommend? Because the reason why I asked that too is because we actually deal with that a lot at club level now, especially after COVID. There's financial situations with a lot of members and they don't want to discuss that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the more straight up you can be, the better. So I really want to get to the bottom of this. Can you help me to, like, this doesn't make sense to me. Can you help me to understand, or please help me to understand what's going on for you? You know, and just instead of sort of playing that game of, if you think that something's not upfront, go back to those open questions. I really like that's one of my favorite ones. I really want to get to the bottom of this. It's important to me to get to the bottom of this and understand what's going on. How can we do that?
Getting to the bottom of anything is referring to Einstein's quote, spend the time analyzing the problem. What's the core of the issue? What is really happening? And once you get to that, the solutions become almost self-evident. It's never that trite, but still, it's much easier. So the whole concept of what is bugging you, what the real issue is, it may not be financial in this case. It might be some personality issues at the club, and they still like to participate in the club because even though they're not paying, they're not leaving either. So there's obviously a tie. So to spend the time to find out what the irritants are on both parties equally is the only way to find a potential solution.
I couldn't agree more.
We've got another question from Jeremy from Judo, but I would add to that creating safety for that person to disclose that information either just to you or to the group of people who are in the mediation with you, and how that information will be used might help them be comfortable. So what can you do to increase their comfort level? Is it a one-to-one meeting so that you can understand the issues, even if you're not going to share that widely with the whole group? What can you do to make them feel safe?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Nadia, can you see Jeremy's question?
What are some guidelines that would lead a dispute to arbitration versus mediation? Well, I think that a lot of it is the willingness. So if you have two parties who are willing to go to mediation and willing to be open to moving from their positions, then and working collaboratively, then that's a good case for mediation. But I've certainly had referrals before where people are just like, no, I want you to review all of these emails from the last 3 years and then tell me that I'm right, or make a decision. And those are the ones that would really just go to arbitration.
All right, well, we're bang on time here. I think that's a first for us, Nadia. We like to take these about half an hour long, but they're good discussions. Thanks everybody for coming. I know some people had to leave early, and that's fine and great. We all have things on our plates these days, but I found that really helpful, and I hope you did too. We will be posting this recording and the slide deck on our Learning Center, which I posted the link earlier on in the chat if you want to dig it out. And you're welcome to join any of these future Safe Sport workshops. Spread the word. If there's other people that you think might be interested, send them the invite. If I don't have their contact info, then they can sign up for our newsletter, because we do send them out in the wide newsletter most of the time now. So that's a good way to get there, but feel free to share far and wide. And thanks for joining us today. It was lovely to have you here. And thank you, Nadia.
Yeah, it was so much fun. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, please reach out anytime.
Oh, if you'd like to get on the newsletter mailing list, oh gosh, do I know how to do that on our website? I'm sure it's on our website somewhere. Let me find the link, hang on. Latest news, maybe? Stay in the know, haha, okay. Let me see here. I will send the link. Everyone. Paste. So if you go to the viaSport website, to the news tab, there's a little box on the right that says stay in the know, and you can put your email address in there and you can subscribe to the newsletter. All right. Wonderful. Thank you everybody for joining us.